are interrupting our programs to bring you a news flash.
This is London calling. Here is a news flash. The German radio has just announced that Hitler is dead.
My name is Tomi Reichental.
I'm Suzi Diamond.
I'm Zoltan Zinn Collis.
I was born in Slovakia.
I was born in Hungary.
I was born in Slovakia.
I was born Suzi Molnar.
I'm Jewish.
And I'm what I am called a Holocaust survivor, which technically I am. I would like to say I'm just a survivor of life.
My childhood in Slovakia was a very pleasant one. I was born in 1935. This was just when Hitler became Chancellor of Germany.
There was in my family. There was my brother Terry, who was 4 years older than myself, and my parents. And I was about 1.5. I don't know what happened to my father. He was meant to be called up into the army, but that was a ploy that the Germans had for, they would like to remove the men out of the household first, and then they came back for the women and children. And all I remember about my father was a photograph that my mother had on a mantelpiece.
But in Slovakia we didn't feel from the beginning any discrimination. It actually started in 1939 when Germany invaded Sudetenland, and the German installed a puppet government in Slovakia, which was very pro-Nazi, and therefore Slovakia in actual fact wasn't occupied by Germany, while the rest of Europe was occupied. Slovakia joined the German-Japanese Axis, so Slovakia actually helped the Nazi regime when the war broke out in 1939.
I was of a Jewish father and a Hungarian Protestant mother, and as the war was brewing, the Second World War was brewing, and things were getting hairy, our local SS Gestapo, Nazi, whatever, came to my mother with a piece of paper for her to sign, which she wouldn't, because that paper was to announce her marriage. He went off and came back a few days later, and we were all seized, arrested, rounded up, lifted, whatever expression you want to use, including my father, who had been in hiding in the woods, but wasn't really able for that. He wasn't fit for the actual life. Anyway, it was winter, and he'd been betrayed, if you like, in a local pub. They brought him along, quite badly beaten up, and then the whole family was arrested.
First they arrested a young man, single young man and single young woman, which they needed for the German, for the slave labor. Later, the old people, small shopkeeper, and people generally that were not useful to the Slovak economy. Because my father was a farmer, he was considered useful to the economy.
Didn't even want us to take our coats, and it was winter time, and my mother said they're not going without getting their coats. And I was around 1.5 at that stage.
Once my mother was arrested, they asked her, "Where are you coming from?" She said, "I'm coming from Merašice, from the village," and etc., etc. So they said, "Where are your things?" And she said, "My cases are in the train station," because we were going to travel. So, of course, they went, they collected the cases. When they opened them, they found children's clothes in it. We were waiting for my mother in another shop, and so they said, "We see children's clothes. You have children, where are they?" And so she told them, "We are there." So we were brought to my mother, and then from there to the Gestapo headquarters, and from there to the detention camp in Slovakia.
So we were first brought to a holding camp in Budapest, where all other Hungarian people were all gathered around from all around the country. So we all were sort of brought to Budapest first. We were actually put on the last Terry and myself, my mother, we were actually on the last cattle truck that left Hungary.
We spent the first night in our little town or village, whatever, and then we were loaded onto the cattle trucks. We'd stopped for what the Americans call a rest stop, and 3 young girls actually got off and the truck, and they moved off to one side a bit. They still had a bit of dignity left, which would have been very difficult at this stage. And God assumed they were trying to escape, so he just shot one of them without any warning, cry or anything. Just shot her. And the other 2, of course, started to run away, so he just shot the other 2. And then we all were loaded back up on the train. And memory in my mind is of being on this wagon, looking out the doorway at my mother on the platform with a bundle in her arms. And German guard, I assume he was German, was grappling with my mother to take this bundle off her. He, of course, won. He got the bundle and had a quick look at it and just threw it over the wall at the back of the station, back of the platform. I don't know what town, country, city, where that was, but I do know that that bundle was the corpse of my baby sister.
In the middle, there was a big barrel which served as a toilet facility, and from that moment we became like cattle. The conditions in the carriage were absolutely horrible. We were like animals. There was no privacy. The stench was just unbelievable.
There was no water. We got very little to drink or eat, but it was, as I said, it was winter time, and icicles were forming outside. And my brother was able to just put his hand through, and he broke off a few of them. And that's what we were using to get some water. So there weren't that many. So whatever we had, everybody else obviously wanted it. So there was a couple, and he managed to snap some of them off.
Continued on our journey with the doors shut, without a stop for the next 36, possibly 48 hours, I'm not certain, until we got to Ravensbrück. When we first got on the train, men was separated from the women and children. So in fact, after we'd got onto the train, I never saw my father again. I don't know what happened to him or where it happened, but I imagine it was Ravensbrück.
We were traveling about 5 days a night, until eventually the train stopped in the middle of the night. The next thing, the carriage opened and we were greeted with shout of heraus, out, out, and bags of Alsatians.
And we stayed in Ravensbrück, I don't know, maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks, I'm not sure. I was only 4.5 years old. And then we moved to Belsen, Bergen-Belsen.
We were walking for about 2 hours. It was raining, it was winter, and it was North Germany. We found out eventually that we were going to Bergen-Belsen. Bergen-Belsen was established in 1940 for political prisoners and high-ranking Russian and Polish officers, which were kept in Bergen-Belsen for the purpose of exchanging them for Germans in Allied hands. But in 1943, the German government decided to convert the camp to a concentration camp to hold up to 25,000 prisoners.
When you arrived in the camp, we had to stand in line, and everybody stood under their own initial, and it took a long time for the queue to get up to where to the top, and that's when they took your name and how old you are, etc. And I had little sleepers in my ears. That was the only thing that my father had ever given me, that they took the sleepers away from me. And I was very upset, and my mother said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll buy you more. I'll buy you another pair." But of course that never happened. And that was the only thing that I had, like, to remind me of my father. And I never wore earrings again for, I must have been like nearly 40 years. I never wore them. And my father had my adopted father had a jewellery shop, and I couldn't bear to wear earrings.
We already noticed the starvation in the camp because we saw these skeletons walking around. You couldn't call them people because they were just skin and bone.
The barracks was not a very pleasant. The bunks. There were 3 tiers of bunks. We picked the bottom bunk. We didn't realise which was of the 3 positions were going to be the best. The top one wasn't good because you got no air, and you were practically on top of the ceiling, and the middle one you were obviously between the 2, and one thought the bottom one would be the best, but in fact it wasn't really, because everybody was getting sick and diarrhea, and everything fell down on top of you. So whichever one you were in wasn't good. Whichever bunk you were in was not the most pleasant.
You know, it's a dilemma when I have to describe starvation or cold, because when you say starving, I can only compare it. With us it was that we got the food and we were hungry still. And so we were hungry for months, for weeks and months, all the time hungry. And with cold was the same thing.
The liquid we got was like we got a coffee, but it was strong coffee, not very pleasant. And we got something which was like gruel, porridge, which was horrible, thick and lumpy, and it was impossible to swallow it. And you got a slice of bread. It was meant to be like 1 slice per child, and the bread wasn't bread like today. It was black, coarse, horrible bread, and really that was about the amount of food that we ever got to eat. And sometimes you got like a watery soup with a carrot or a turnip sort of floating past it. But then you mightn't get that every day. You might get it today and you mightn't get anything tomorrow. So whatever you got, you had to eat it because you didn't know when you were going to get fed again or any food again.
We hear about all this brutality, yes, of course it was there, but has there ever been anything else in this world? But there was one German guard who took pity on my mother or me or somebody, but she actually got us extra rations. I don't know how, and she got caught by her superiors, but she still kept bringing them, which was a pretty chancy thing to do.
But the mothers, they used to invent all kind of games for us, to keeping us busy, to run a little bit outside and get the blood moving and keep ourselves warm. And I remember the games we used to play were the Jews against the Germans, and the Jews always won.
I became very friendly with Zoltan. We used to sit and play together. Not that there was much to do, but not much to play. And we used to sit on dead bodies till we were told off for that as well. Because there was nothing, it was only gravel, and after a while it's rather uncomfortable to be sitting on that all the time. So I don't know, it was probably my suggestion. I said, "Oh, well, why don't we go and sit over there?" Because at least we thought it was soft, but it was just sort of what children would think of doing. You don't think anything. You don't think anything of it. I mean, especially when they're all around you, and every day they would take out more people who dead out of your barracks, and more people then would come in, and more people would come out, and they just piled them up outside our barracks. They just piled them higher and higher. I mean, it wasn't something unusual. We just sort of saw the pile getting higher every day. It wasn't sort of something that you would sort of think, oh, I shouldn't do this, because they're all, you were kind of stepping over everybody, and the ones that were barely alive were sort of dead shortly after, soon after that, and you just sort of saw them dropping in right in front of you all the time.
We only knew that something was happening. It was about 11th of April that suddenly we saw that the guards from the guard tower disappeared, and we knew something was happening. The camp was open, but nobody dared to leave it.
The camp was liberated in April 1945. At that stage, my mother was barely alive. She had got TB, and I was very sick with. I had typhus, but as I shortly after liberation, she died, and I was pretty sick at that stage. But the British had they had set up sort of like a hospital unit. Mm-hmm. Where sort of the dying, the very ill, different tents, mm-hmm. And of course my mother was in the one that she was in the tent that sort of they knew people who they knew that they couldn't sort of do any more for, and then I was in the one that who were very ill and sort of on borderline. They didn't know whether I was going to survive or not.
Bergen-Belsen, 24th of April, 1945. This is the doctor in charge of the female section of the concentration camp, Bergen-Belsen. She was a prisoner at this camp.
Dass man hat uns Häftlinge in einen schmutzigen, verlausten Lager auf der Erde geschmissen, ohne Stroh,
she says,
ohne Betten.
There were no covers, straw stacks, or beds of any kind. Persons had to lie directly on the ground. They were given 1/12 of a loaf of bread and some watery soup daily. Almost 75% of the people were bloated from hunger. An epidemic of typhus broke out. 250 women and thousands of men died daily. In the men's camp, they cut out liver, heart, and other parts of the dead and ate them.
Genommen junge, 19-jährige, schöne Frauen.
She adds that various medical experiments were made on the prisoners. Doctors gave some of them intravenous injections of 20 cubic centimeters of benzene, which caused the victims to die. She concludes by saying that sterilizations and other gynecological experiments were performed on 19-year-old girls.
Dass endlich der Tag gekommen ist und uns frei gemacht.
There was an Irish doctor, and he was a pediatrician, Bob Collis, who was one of these people who was larger than life, and you either hated him or you loved him. There was absolutely no in-between. And just at the end of the war, he joined the British Red Cross with another Irish pediatrician, and they linked up with a few colleagues in London, and they put together a Red Cross team. On his journey, he, as I put it, he acquired a Dutch law student who joined the team, and she spoke a great number of languages, so she was very useful. But she is the woman who actually physically found me in the camp. Now, my mother was dying of typhus. Oh no, she was dead at this stage. No, she died the day we were liberated. But my sister had, she wasn't too ill actually, my sister wasn't too ill. She wasn't well, of course. But my brother and myself, we both had typhoid and typhus, and I had pleurisy as well, and my TB in the spine and all sorts of lovely things like that. But there was this Dutch woman who physically found me in Belsen and brought him to see me, and said she had found an entrancing scrap of humanity. And again, this is one of the things that's been recounted to me, so I have no reason to doubt it, because he told me himself. Apparently I said to him in German, "My father is dead, you are now my father." And he said in English, "Yeah, right." And neither of us knew what the other had said, but it stuck, and there was a bond started then between us, which lasted till his death. And I don't know what that bond was, and it was never discussed. But when he said, yeah, right, he didn't know I still had a sister alive, and he didn't know I had Suzi and Terry as my friends, and this other girl Evelyn, and ended up with him bringing 5 of us back to Ireland.
In July, we were taken to Slovakia in buses, and we were, of course, reunited with my father, who was already home at the time. He didn't know about us, we didn't know about him. We were reunited afterwards. We stayed in Slovakia, but we didn't feel really home, even though Slovakia was our home. This was the only home we knew. We were the Jews, and we were still a stranger in our own land. So at the time, the state of Israel was being established. There was war in Palestine between the Jews and Arabs. And just as the war ended in 1949, we emigrated to Israel.
We were brought to Sweden, but a lot of the others had been brought to Sweden before us, even though I think they had located sort of family for them. But Sweden was neutral, and we were still terribly ill, and we were brought to Sweden to Children's Hospital there, and we were there for a year, and we were still. It took really that length of time for us to sort of put on weight and to recuperate. Even when we came back here, we were still not really well.
He found homes for the other 3 children, and my sister and myself he brought up as his own. Never adopted us. There's a bit of confusion there. My adopted father, they were actually never adopted because the adoption laws, well, there weren't any adoption laws, in fact, at that time. But even when they did have adoption, he couldn't, because you had to have the prospective parents and the child had to have the same religion.
We were actually the first adoption in Ireland, my brother and myself. There was no adoption in Ireland when we came here. And after we were here for a while, my parents were getting worried that we might get sent back to Hungary. And Hungary was still communist at that stage, so she started up a committee with people who used to work in Ferry Hill, and a few of them got together and they kept on pushing the government and pushing it to legalize it. So that's really how adoption started.
I finished my studies in Germany, and as I was going to leave Germany, I had a cousin that was in England. She was an au pair there, stayed with a Jewish family, and the man that she stayed with was a manufacturer. He was a Jewish German. And one day she saw an ad in the paper that somebody was looking for a manager to start a factory in Ireland to manufacture zips. And in her innocence, she showed this ad to her boss and said, look, because she knew that he was manufacturing zip, somebody is setting up a company in Ireland. They're looking for a manager. She saw it like a competition. And he said, it's me, I'm looking for somebody. So he said, you know what? I have a cousin that is just finishing his engineering studies in Germany. Maybe he would be the right person to do it. So I went to London, I met this man, and he said, look, I want you to sign for 3-year contract. You will go to Ireland, I will send you to Italy to learn the profession. Then you go to Ireland and you will set the factory up. Stay with me for 3 years. And after 3 years, if you want, you can stay. If you don't, you can go home. Well, again, as a young man, I was at the time about 25. I said, well, I'm traveling the world. He sent me to Italy. I got, it wasn't a big deal for me to learn how to make the zips. And I learned a profession as it happened. At the time, it was very difficult for a foreigner to come to Ireland. You had to have all the reason. But eventually I came to Ireland and I set up the factory, and I met here my wife.
Well, it was difficult also because in those days they thought the best thing to do was to keep us separated. So I only saw Zoltan once after that, no, twice actually, once in Ferry Hill and once in his house, and he kept Bob Collis away from us. And one of the nurses in Ferry Hill lived quite close to where we used to live, and an odd time she used to pop in to see us, and that was stopped. So any connection we had with any of these people were all stopped, and that was sort of really like they were like our family. Sort of landed in this country that we didn't know, a language we couldn't speak, with people who we didn't know, and it was very, very difficult to trust people and to adopt to a whole new country in life, and completely different from what we had known.
The wisdom at the time was that if you ignore these things, well, then they'll go away. And maybe that was right. And the mind is very good at looking after itself, looking after you. And I think this 50 years of silence we all imposed on us was probably because emotionally we weren't able to deal with these things. So I just locked them away.
We only started speaking about it when the Mary Rose Durley started to write this book. She I don't know who she got in touch with Zoltan, I think, first, and somebody else, and then she rang me up and she rang my brother up, and kind of both of us sort of said, go away, leave us alone. And eventually she said, look, let me just come down and see you, and if you don't want to speak about it, okay. So when she sort of started talking about Zoltan and started talking, then I started sort of talking about it. See, where is it? It's not out there. There it is. There's photographs in it. And Mary Robinson has signed that. When we were up at the Arthur Upton and we got her to sign. See, Mary Robinson.
Is that Hand Collis?
Hand Collis, yes. I got everyone who was in the book to sign it. These are all the people that they had a list of people in Ireland already. The Germans who they were going to come and pick up. That's Zoltan and his sister, and that's Zoltan and his other brother that died in the camp. That's when we arrived. That's Zoltan. Yeah. It's me, Bob Collis. That's my brother Terry. Then we were there in the Ferry Hill. That's Hand Collis. There's Roselle. Her sister was saved by Schindler.
To an extent, this is why I personally feel it's so important that I tell my story. Because apart from it being quite a good story, anyway, I'm not a religious person. I'm spiritual to an extent, but I don't believe in any one particular religion. I mean, you can call it God or Buddha or Allah, Jehovah, the chosen one, whatever you like. Maybe it's only a computer. But I think at the back of all this, there must be some purpose to it, because there's too many things have happened for it to be just chance. Now, I am, no way do I wish to blow myself up into anything which I am not. But there's too many things have happened. So I think, well, there's two things. One, that all these things have happened to me through Bob Collis, and okay, I've been able to repay what he gave me in life. But I do feel a very strong obligation to speak for the 12 million who can't. I suppose, I don't know, it's my philosophy, but my take on life is really that life is there for the living, and you get on with it. And you try not to offend anybody, and you try not to hurt anybody. But if you do, and if you get a chance, you come back and say sorry. But if you don't get the chance, well, tough, it's done with it. Move on.